You know, it's actually kind of funny how we treat our smartphones. Like if your phone battery dips to 15%, you just drop
Oh
everything.
yeah, total panic mode. You're
Yeah.
scanning the room for an outlet immediately.
Yeah, right. You're aggressively swiping away apps. You're turning down the screen brightness. It's a full-blown crisis. But then we look at our own lives, our, physical energy, our ambition, our relationships, and we're just walking around at 2% battery constantly.
Yeah, and just wondering why everything feels so incredibly difficult.
Exactly. We just sort of accept this chronic depletion as our normal operating state. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're talking directly to you, the listener who wants to extract the ultimate blueprint for escaping mediocrity. We want to optimize life, but, without drowning in a sea of disconnected life hacks.
Right, because we're looking at a massive interconnected architecture today. And this is all based on Tom Biyu's extensive framework. So the goal here isn't just to mimic some random morning routine or like memorize a list of financial rules.
Yeah, we need to go deeper than that.
Exactly. We need to dissect the underlying mechanisms.
Yeah.
I mean, the actual biology, the psychology, and the physics of how human performance operates at an elite level.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to build this blueprint chronologically. So we're starting with the absolute bedrock of human output, which is your biology and your sleep.
Yep, the foundation.
Because, as the source material hammers home repeatedly, you simply cannot outthink physical fatigue.
You really can't. And the framework leans heavily on a quote from Vince Lombardi here, which is, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all."
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, because people constantly misdiagnose their lack of motivation as like a character flaw. They think they just lack discipline or willpower.
Right, like they're just being lazy.
Exactly. But in reality, they're battling cellular fatigue. If we look at the second law of thermodynamics, it dictates that all systems naturally degrade toward chaos and entropy.
Mm,
And, well, your body is a system.
a very complex system.
Right. So to maintain order, to have the sheer willpower to tackle a hard project or, say, regulate your emotions during an argument, your cells require literal biological energy. If your ATP production is compromised because you're exhausted, the chaos just wins.
So it's not a moral failing, it's literally just physics.
It's physics.
Okay, so to combat that cellular entropy, the nighttime routine we're looking at is, well, it's intense. The holy grail here is waking up completely naturally. No alarm clocks, it's just allowing your sleep cycles to dictate your morning.
Which is incredibly hard for most people to do.
Oh, totally. And to achieve that, the framework demands a strict 9 p.m. bedtime. But the preparation actually starts hours before you even see a bed. The most jarring detail in the sources for me, it's a 7-hour fast before sleep.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Meaning the absolute last moment you are chewing food or taking in significant liquids is 2 p.m., 2 in the afternoon.
I know it sounds extreme, but the mechanism behind this is fascinating when you look at the autonomic nervous system. So the source experimented relentlessly to figure out why his sleep architecture was so fragmented.
Right, because he was waking up constantly, right.
Exactly. He tracked this recurring loop where he was waking up at 2 a.m. just to use the bathroom, which pulled him completely out of deep sleep. And once he was conscious, his default mode network would kick in.
Oh, and that's when the anxiety starts.
Right, it triggers anxiety about unresolved business problems, and then he's awake for hours. So he tried restricting water, but those micro-awakenings just persisted. It turns out the culprit was digestion.
Digestion. Wait, really? Just from eating too late?
Yeah. Breaking down food requires massive blood flow and energy. And as your body metabolizes carbohydrates and proteins, it actually extracts water as a byproduct.
Oh, wow. I had no idea about the water extraction part.
Yeah, so by moving his entire caloric intake window to before 2 p.m., his body finishes all the heavy lifting of digestion and fluid processing long before his head even hits the pillow.
That is wild. Plus, there's all the environmental engineering they do, right? Like wearing blue light blocking glasses 3 hours before bed to trigger melatonin, blacking out the room. And this one always raises eyebrows, physically taping your mouth shut.
Yes, the mouth taping. That forces you to breathe exclusively through your nose, which leverages James Nestor's research.
Right, the breathing guy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
When you breathe through your mouth at night, you dry out the oral cavity and subtly engage the sympathetic nervous system. That's your fight or flight response.
Which is the exact opposite of what you want when you're trying to sleep.
Exactly. Nasal breathing, on the other hand, releases nitric oxide, which acts as a vasodilator. It opens your airways, maximizes oxygen absorption, and keeps you anchored in that parasympathetic rest and digest state.
That makes a lot of sense. Oh, and to prevent any sudden spikes in cortisol while you're drifting off, the protocol involves listening to 20 to 30 hour long nonfiction biographies.
Right, so the book doesn't end abruptly at 3 a.m. and jolt you awake with sudden silence or a jarring new track.
I get the logic. I really do. It's treating the human body like a closed loop system where every single input dictates the output. But I have to push back a little on this 2 p.m. food cutoff.
I figured you might.
I mean, it just sounds incredibly socially restrictive. You're effectively isolating yourself. You're opting out of dinner parties, evening networking events, family dinners, romantic dates. Aren't we risking, like, optimizing ourselves out of a normal human experience?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the source explicitly addresses this exact tension. These specific extreme parameters aren't meant to be like universal laws written in stone for everyone.
Okay, so you don't have to be a total hermit.
Right. They are an invitation to ruthlessly experiment on your own biology. The core mandate isn't stop eating at 2 p.m. The core mandate is to hold your biological foundation to an elite standard, whatever that looks like for you.
So maybe your personal physiology allows, like, a 6 p.m. cutoff instead.
Exactly. The real takeaway is that you must track your own metrics. You have to build a non-negotiable container for your sleep because everything downstream, your mood, your cognitive elasticity, your patience, it all depends entirely on how well you recovered the night before.
All right, that's fair. So assuming we've engineered the perfect night and woken up naturally, there's the question of momentum. Like, how do we transition from this deeply parasympathetic, rested state into, aggressive, high-performance output?
So the protocol uses a strict 10-minute rule for this. You have exactly 10 minutes from the moment your eyes open to get out of bed, put on your gym clothes, and start physically moving.
And you're doing this completely fasted, obviously, since you haven't eaten since 2 p.m. yesterday.
Yep, completely fasted.
Working out fasted always sounds brutal to me, but I'm assuming this isn't just about, like, burning stubborn fat, right? There's got to be a cognitive play here.
Oh, it's entirely about cognitive priming. The source references John Ratey's book, Spark here. When you elevate your heart rate, especially in a fasted state, you trigger a massive release of BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Right, which is basically like fertilizer for your brain.
Exactly. It promotes neuroplasticity, which makes your neural networks highly adaptable. So if you have a really complex, intractable problem to solve, you want to tackle it while your brain is just swimming in BDNF.
So the physical workout is literally just a tool to chemically optimize the brain for heavy cognitive lifting later in the morning.
Precisely.
But before tackling those heavy problems, there's the mental stack, the meditation phase. And what I really love about this framework is the brutally honest concession it makes. Because sitting in total silence can sometimes feel like absolute torture when your mind is racing.
The worse.
Right. So the protocol allows for exactly 7 minutes of what he calls doom scrolling cats.
Yeah, leveraging our evolutionary wiring for distraction is actually a highly effective way to bypass a panicked amygdala. When you wake up overwhelmed, your brain is just frantically looking for threats.
Like, what's going to go wrong today?
Exactly. So allowing 7 minutes of pure, mindless algorithmic distraction acts as a pattern interrupt. It gives the threat detection system a momentary focal point, essentially tiring it out.
That is so smart. And then once the panic subsides, you immediately transition into 20 minutes of deep rhythmic breathing.
Right. And the objective here isn't like spiritual enlightenment. It's just driving the nervous system down to a baseline of zero stress and zero anxiety.
Which perfectly sets the stage for what he calls thinkitation.
Yes. So once you hit that baseline, your brain waves actually shift from high-frequency beta into the slower alpha and theta frequencies.
The chill zones.
The chill zones, yeah. And in these relaxed states, the rigid boundaries between different regions of your brain start to soften. Thinkitation is the deliberate act of staying in that relaxed posture, maintaining the deep breathing, but consciously dropping a massive complex business or life problem into your lap.
Okay, but why do it in that state specifically?
Because you aren't in a frantic, cortisol-drenched state. Your brain can pull from totally disparate data sets, forging novel connections, and generating solutions you would literally never perceive while in a fight-or-flight mode.
Okay, but here's where I get stuck on the sequence. Right after finding this pristine, zero-stress Zen state where the brain is making all these beautiful connections, the protocol demands a mandatory cold plunge or freezing shower.
It does.
And the success metric isn't a timer, right? It's staying submerged until you are uncontrollably shivering. But if the entire goal of the morning so far was to reach absolute zero stress, doesn't deliberately shocking the system with freezing water completely blow up that calm state?
It definitely seems contradictory at first, until you look at the mechanism of resilience. The cold exposure isn't about chronic, lingering stress. It's about acute, self-imposed adversity.
Okay, I'm listening.
When you step into freezing water, you experience a massive spike in norepinephrine. Your brain is basically screaming that you are in mortal danger.
Which you kind of are, perceptually.
Right. But the training is in your ability to observe that panic and deliberately slow your breathing down anyway.
Yeah.
You are proving to your nervous system before the day even begins that you can remain sovereign and calm amidst intense physiological discomfort.
Oh, wow. So you aren't shattering the Zen state, you're actually battle testing it.
Exactly. You're proving you can hold on to it when things get rough.
So we're building a nervous system that doesn't panic when things get uncomfortable, which honestly is the perfect prerequisite for the next phase of the blueprint, which is actually pursuing massive goals without folding when the universe pushes back.
Right. And this is applying what the source calls the physics of progress.
The physics of progress.
Yeah, it's essentially the scientific method, but stripped of all ego and applied directly to your daily life. It functions as an infinite loop. First, you form a hypothesis like a best guess on how to build a product, fix a system, or overcome an obstacle.
Okay.
Second, you execute that hypothesis aggressively. And third, you fail.
And the framework assumes failure is a feature, not a bug, right?
It is absolutely inevitable and necessary, but this is exactly where most people break. When failure happens, the ego just rushes in to protect our self-image. We make excuses.
We blame everyone else.
We do. But the physics of progress demands that you bypass the ego entirely and, to use the source's phrase, stare nakedly at your inadequacies. You have to cognitively decouple your self-worth from the outcome.
So failure isn't a referendum on your value as a human being.
No. It is simply the most information-rich data stream on Earth. You just extract the data, adjust your hypothesis, and run the loop again.
And to process that data honestly, you need a terrifying level of extreme accountability. Like the source uses this radical scenario that completely stops you in your tracks. He says if he were T-boned by a drunk driver, he would take full responsibility for the accident.
Yeah, that one is hard to swallow for a lot of people.
It's nuts, not because the drunk driver isn't legally and morally at fault, obviously, but because placing the blame on the driver instantly transfers all agency away from himself.
Right. Blame is a very comforting mechanism, but it leaves you utterly powerless. If you accept the blame, you give yourself leverage. You can ask, why was I driving at 2 a.m.? Was I distracted? Could my defensive driving skills be sharper?
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. This mindset perfectly mirrors how you approach a brutally hard video game like Dark Souls.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right, like when your character gets crushed by a boss for the 50th time, you don't sit there screaming that the game's code is malicious. You don't write an angry letter to the developers claiming the hitbox was unfair.
No, because it wouldn't help you win.
Exactly. You drop the ego instantly. You just say, okay, I rolled a half second too early. The boss has a 3-strike attack pattern. I need to adapt. You take absolute ownership of the failure because that is literally the only mathematical way to beat the level.
The video game analogy captures the exact psychological detachment required here perfectly. The expert mindset refuses to participate in what they call the fiction of feeling better about yourself.
The fiction of feeling better about yourself. I love that.
Yeah, excuses are often 100% valid. The world is objectively unfair. The economy might actually be stacked against you. But focusing on the validity of your excuse does not alter your current trajectory.
Right. It doesn't move you forward.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Radical accountability acts as a cognitive filter, keeping your attention locked entirely on the variables you can manipulate to create actual progress.
Okay, so let's take that ruthless, variable, manipulating mindset and point it at the ultimate measurable metric in our society.
Wealth. Let's do it.
The blueprint goes deep into breaking the time for money equation because financial literacy is sort of the graveyard of so many high performers.
It really is. They master their morning routine, they're super productive, but they just bleed cash. The absolute baseline of this framework is living aggressively below your means to accumulate 6 to 12 months of liquid emergency cash.
Which sounds basic, but nobody does it.
Exactly. And this isn't just conservative financial advice. It's a structural defense against threshold events. A medical emergency, a sudden layoff, a market crash. If you lack cash reserves, a threshold event forces you to make desperate short-term decisions that just compound your ruin.
But the framework is also clear that hoarding cash under a mattress is a slow march to poverty because of inflation, which leads us to investing. Now, you would think a framework obsessed with extreme ownership and outworking the competition would advocate for, like, aggressive, high-risk day trading.
Right, getting in there and beating the market.
Exactly. But it advocates the exact opposite.
It does. The shift to passive investing through broad market index funds requires a massive ego check. The source points out the sheer hubris of trying to pick individual stocks.
Hey.
You are going up against institutions like Ray Dalio's Bridgewater.
They have slightly better tools than we do.
Slightly. They have fiber optic cables executing trades in literal milliseconds, thousands of PhD analysts, and AI models digesting global satellite imagery. Your ego wants to believe you can outsmart that machine, but you cannot.
You're bringing a knife to a nuclear fight.
Exactly. The path to wealth is accepting market averages. You buy a massive basket of the top 500 companies and dollar cost average, entirely automating the process so your emotions can't sabotage your portfolio during a market dip.
Which frees up all that cognitive bandwidth to focus on where you actually can generate massive asymmetrical returns, which is your career and the assets you build. Like, if you're on the standard corporate path, just seeking a 3% annual raise, you're just following a job description. To build real wealth, you have to become a heat-seeking missile for the company's hardest, most painful problems.
Because compensation is directly correlated to the difficulty of the problems you can solve and how difficult you are to replace.
Yep.
But more importantly, the framework demands you shift your focus from acquiring income to acquiring and building assets. An asset puts money in your pocket independently of your daily labor. A liability drains your cash flow.
And we have to confront the uncomfortable reality the source raises about homeownership here.
Oh boy, the house debate.
Yeah, your primary residence, the one with the 30-year mortgage, the property taxes, the leaking roof, is structurally a liability. It locks up capital that could be compounding in the market while constantly demanding cash injections for maintenance.
It really makes you rethink the American dream.
It makes me think of a treadmill, honestly. Trading your time for a salary is like running on a treadmill. You're sweating, your heart rate is up, you're working incredibly hard, but you aren't moving an inch geographically.
Right.
True wealth isn't learning how to run faster on the treadmill. True wealth is building the treadmill from scratch, owning the patent, and charging the gym a monthly subscription for access to it.
Manufacturing value out of thin air. The source's own origin story with Quest bars illustrates this perfectly. They didn't acquire a massive existing brand. When they started, the protein bars were practically worthless.
They couldn't give them away.
Literally. They would stand at fitness expos, physically begging attendees to take a free sample. But through extreme ownership, iterating the recipe, mastering the supply chain, aggressively solving distribution problems, they built the underlying value of that asset up over years.
And it culminated in a billion-dollar exit.
Exactly. That is the physics of progress applied directly to an asset.
Okay, so we've optimized our biology, we've bulletproofed our nervous system against failure, and we've mapped the architecture of wealth. But honestly, none of this matters if you come home to a chaotic, toxic personal life.
The ultimate boss fight.
Right. The final pillar of this blueprint tackles the messiest variable of all, human relationships. Like, how do we apply systems thinking to love and purpose without completely destroying the magic?
Well, the foundational shift is eradicating the Hollywood myth of passion. Passion is not an archaeological dig.
Meaning you don't just, like, stumble upon it.
Right. You don't gaze into your soul, brush away some dirt, and suddenly unearth this fully formed, destiny-driven passion. Passion is an architectural build. You find a tiny, fragile spark of interest, and you relentlessly invest thousands of hours into gaining mastery over it.
So the mastery comes first.
The friction of gaining mastery is what chemically wires your brain to become passionate about the subject. And the blueprint applies this exact same deliberate architectural approach to sustaining a marriage.
Yes, the source outlines what he calls a relationship cocktail, based on his decades-long dynamic with his wife, Lisa. And it's structured around 3 non-negotiable rules. Rule 1, don't criticize.
It is so much harder than it sounds.
Oh, incredibly hard. When you feel the inevitable urge to nitpick how your partner loaded the dishwasher, you have to deploy a pattern interrupt. You literally force your brain to find a genuine compliment instead.
Because attention is a magnifying glass. Whatever behavior you focus on expands in your mind. If you indulge the annoyance, resentment becomes the dominant lens through which you view your partner.
And resentment is a relationship killer.
Absolute poison. So Rule 2 leverages biology to prevent that resentment, which is maintaining a highly active sex life. And this isn't frivolous advice. It is the deliberate systemic triggering of neurochemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin.
The bonding hormones.
Right. These hormones quite literally alter your brain's perception of your partner, dampening amygdala reactivity. It creates a neurochemical buffer, essentially putting on rose-colored glasses so the natural friction of cohabitation doesn't erode the bond.
That's fascinating. And then Rule 3 tackles the inevitable conflicts. High-level communication. It requires you to state your base insecurities out loud. Instead of fighting over the symptom, like why someone is working late again, you offer your partner the root cause.
You have to be totally transparent.
Exactly. You say, I'm feeling neglected and insecure about my priority in your life. You have to expose the raw nerve so they know what they're actually navigating, rather than just arguing about the clock.
It also requires constantly checking what they call base assumptions. Most gridlocked arguments happen because two people are operating on entirely different foundational premises about what a successful life looks like, but they never actually state them aloud.
Right, you're playing two different games.
Yes. If you don't expose those underlying assumptions, you are just shouting into the void.
Which leads to the most controversial but honestly fascinating application of these rules. Their concept of the average Wednesday.
Ah, yes.
The source and his wife made a highly analytical, deeply conscious choice to opt out of having children. They basically reverse-engineered what they wanted a random average Wednesday in their 50s to look like.
And they realized they wanted to protect their ultimate priority, which was their obsession with each other and their shared business mission.
Right. They recognized that the fractured obligations of parenting would pull them away from that very specific vision.
It demonstrates a radical level of self-awareness. I mean, biology and societal programming push overwhelmingly toward prioritizing offspring above all else.
Yeah.
By consciously choosing to bypass that biological imperative, they engineered a life where their marriage remains the undisputed, uninterrupted center of gravity.
So, what does this all mean for us? Like, if we approach our intimate relationships with the same cold metrics, pattern interrupts, and biological engineering that we use to scale a startup, aren't we sterilizing love? Don't we risk stripping the actual humanity and, messy romance out of the equation?
This raises an important question. But the instinct is to think systems destroy romance when the reality is the exact opposite. Chaos destroys romance. Resentment destroys romance.
That's a great point.
But creating a rigorous framework for communication and prioritizing neurochemical bonding, you are building a highly secure, predictable container. And it is only inside a truly safe, unshakable container that genuine vulnerability, wild romance, and deep, messy human connection can actually thrive without tearing the whole foundation apart.
Wow. Okay, let's look at the immense territory we've covered today for you, the listener. We started by silencing cellular fatigue, hacking the autonomic nervous system with 2 p.m. fasting and nasal breathing.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We navigated the physics of progress, utilizing extreme accountability to strip the ego out of failure. We mapped out how to build inflation-proof wealth by accepting market averages and building true assets. And finally, we explored how to architect deep, intentional relationships by managing our neurochemistry.
And the unifying thread across every single one of these domains is clear. Elite success is never about innate talent. It is about your willingness to run the scientific method on your own life.
Being the scientist of your own life.
Exactly. It's about measuring reality with honest metrics. And most importantly, it's about your capacity to absorb failure, extract the data, and start again the next morning without a loss of enthusiasm.
Absolutely. But I want to leave you with one final, slightly uncomfortable thought to chew on. We just spent this entire deep dive exploring how to ruthlessly optimize absolutely every single hour of your existence to escape mediocrity. But if you are constantly living inside this physics of progress, if your brain is perpetually hunting for the next metric to improve, the next inefficiency to crush, the next flaw to fix, at what point does the relentless pursuit of optimization become the very thing that prevents you from actually sitting back and enjoying the average Wednesday you worked so incredibly hard to build?
That is the ultimate paradox of the high performer. The engine that gets you there is often the exact same engine that won't let you rest.
So true. Keep exploring these ideas, keep running your experiments, but remember to check your internal battery life and maybe, just occasionally, let your phone hit 15% without panicking. Thanks for listening.